Hi everyone. My name's Kim Gorham. I'm a volunteer with the Texas Sports Hall of Fame. I'd like to thank you guys for coming out to our second annual Sports Book Festival. I'm here to introduce Dr. John Wood, whose book Beyond the Ballpark is the subject of our first talk today. Dr. Wood's, this is his most recent book, came out in 2016. It explores the personal lives of 50 Baseball Hall of Famers, examining their childhoods, families, influences, life-changing events, defining moments, and their lives after baseball. I should go back and mention that the subtitle of the book is The Honorable, Immoral, and Eccentric Lives of Baseball Legends. So that's kind of where we're going here. He puts these guys sort of on a moral continuum, would you say? You know, what these people were really like as opposed to what the legends say they were like. Anyway, among that group of 50 Hall of Famers are two men who are enshrined here in the Texas Sports Hall of Fame, Rogers Hornsby and Tris Speaker. Hornsby is from Winters, Texas, and Tris Speaker is from right down the road in Hubbard, and is buried right down the road in Hubbard. So anyway, I believe we've got items in the hall from both people. So if that interests you, you can check it out after the talk. Dr. Wood is Professor Emeritus of Religion at Baylor, where he taught for 23 years. And he's a member of the Society for American Baseball Research. So he's a sabermetrician. I don't know if that term means anything to you, but sabermetrics became a big thing in baseball within the last generation, and it's really revolutionized the way the game is played and understood in a lot of ways. Anyway, Dr. Wood's other published works include Perspectives on War in the Bible and The Panthers and the Militias, Brothers Under the Skin, which is about the Black Panthers and the militia movement of recent years that sort of in some ways mirrors the Black Panthers and their rise and their goals. Anyway, that's all I've got. Dr. Wood is going to give a presentation, and then we'll have questions and answers at the end, so you can be, if something occurs to you when you're listening, keep it in mind, and he'll be happy to answer all your questions. All right? Dr. Wood?
Thank y'all. Thank you for coming. I'm going to have to discipline myself. I tended to wander around when I taught at Baylor, but I've got to stay to the microphone, I'm told, so I will try to anchor myself here. I want to tell you how I kind of got into all of this. Baseball got into my blood when I was a kid. My dad was taught how to play baseball by the uncle of Willie Mays in the Birmingham area. He worked for my grandparents, and he took my dad and taught him how to pitch a curve and do other stuff. So my dad was a good little ball player. We watched Saturday baseball with Dizzy Dean and Pee Wee Reese every Saturday. We never missed it. My mother, to her dying day, was a fan of the Atlanta Braves, watched all their games, so it just kind of got in my blood. And then I started some years ago, just almost by accident, decided I wanted to go to a baseball game in all 30 major league ballparks. So in 1959, I went to my first game at old Connie Mack Stadium in Philadelphia, and then 45 years later, got the last one in Oakland. And now, of course, by the time I finished, a lot of the ones I'd been to had been torn down and replaced, and I actually did a little trip this summer, a baseball road trip, and went to kind of retreaded St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee. All those had been replaced, so it was kind of fun to go back to those places. So I'm still into this this game. And what got me started on some of this is, be a little surprised, is that in my travels, I like to go to cemeteries. I like to look up famous dead people of all stripes. I started out more with musicians in Vienna with Mozart and Beethoven, and Moscow with all the Russian ones, and in London. And so I went anywhere I travel, I just, I do a little research, find out who's buried here. So I started doing this with baseball players and making sure they were a part of it. And this is when I kind of got the idea was I'd go to these places. There was a PBS special a few years ago in which it was about Frederick Douglass, and a poet said he was visiting Frederick Douglass' gravesite, and he said he was soaking up the soles, S-O-U-L-S, with the soles, S-O-L-E-S, of his feet. It's kind of soaking, it's a sense of being there. And I found a little bit of that interesting thing when you linger at people's gravesite and you start thinking about stuff. It's almost like you're communicating with these folks. It's kind of weird, I know. But anyway, I started doing this, and as I was there, knowing what the exploits of these ball players, I began to ask the question, what were they really like? And then I taught ethics at Baylor, so I'm interested in that type of thing. So what were these folks like? What bent the twig? What are the people and the events that made them turn out like they did? And so I started the research project when I retired from Baylor 14 years ago. I began my 10-year project of doing this. So I have 50 ball players here, Hall of Famers. The thing they had to do to get in my book, they had to be dead, and I had to visit their gravesite. So, and by the way, in case any of you are crazy like I am, I bought my notebook here. This notebook is nothing but pictures of gravesites of baseball players. I know it's crazy. Most of them are Hall of Famers, but not all of them. And so, if you're interested in that kind of thing, you're welcome to look at it. So, I find it interesting that a lot of people do this. Stu Thornley, who's a member of SABR, the baseball researchers, has visited the gravesite of all Hall of Fame ball players. And he has given the GPS coordinates of their gravesite, not just the cemetery, not the office. So I can drive right in, and he really saved me a lot of time. I can go this way, drive right in, go right to the gravesite. It saves you a lot of time. And I also found out in these cemeteries that the office people are almost unanimously friendly. Here you walk in, you're not going to be a buying customer. I want to know where some of these people are. I have rarely, only in one instance in my hometown of Birmingham, in which they say, well, we'll give you $3, but anything after that, we charge you $5 to tell you where somebody's buried. My parents are here in this cemetery. I mean, that doesn't make any difference, so. Anyway, but most of the time they're very gracious to go get in their computers or file whatever they've got, Some places you go, they wouldn't tell me where Jack Ruby was, but I found him. In some places they don't want you to know. Some of these mobsters that I looked up, they won't, but you have to go looking for them anyway. So it's just kind of fun to roam around some of these majestic cemeteries, looking up these ghosts. But so what I did when I started this research, again, all Hall of Famers, I divided them up, and again, it's a little arbitrary, I know, but the good guys, the mixed bags, then the eccentrics, and they're kind of the fun guys, they're the weirdos, and they're just delightful humans, and then the sad cases. So I'm just going to pick out a few and say a few things about it and leave it to you to ask some questions on people you're interested in. Now, there are 50 of them, and of course, all of them are dead, so unless you kind of go back in baseball, some of these you may not even be familiar with. But when I talked with the people at Roman Littlefield, I actually had the really good guys, but there wasn't a whole lot of difference. But Walter Johnson is probably the finest human being to ever set foot on a baseball diamond. A wonderful, wonderful human being. And then George Kell from up in Arkansas. And when I was doing George Kell researching, I said, this guy cannot be this good. It's something, he's got to have a dark side somewhere. You look at his parents, they'd kind of be the ideal parents. His first wife, who died after a number of years, was the ideal wife. His second wife. And, you know, this guy was just great. So I made some phone calls up to Swifton, Arkansas. I'd been up there to visit his gravesite. So I said, I want to see if I can talk. So I called his church. He's very active in the Methodist church there. And I said, who are some people that can you give me some names that are willing to talk about George? And, you know, nobody had a single negative word about this guy. He was a wonderful guy. He probably doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. His numbers are not really quite there, but he belongs in the Hall of Fame for human beings. I can tell you, he was a wonderful guy. And so, and of course, now another one who would have been there if he'd been in the Hall of Fame would be Gil Hodges. And he's in the next book I'm going to do on this, although there won't be limited to Hall of Famers. But Gil Hodges is a great guy. He died way too young. He put him in a kind of a tragic area, too, and he was, 49 when he died. But and then the mixed bags, the most intriguing person I studied was Ty Cobb. Of course, a lot's been written about Ty. And he's a brilliant and the most complex character I ever read about and studied. You know, it's a tragic thing that happened to him that kind of turned him into a demon. I mean, he was, you know, by nature a pugnacious fighter. And then you get what happened in his youth when his mother killed his father. It was a crazy story that it was, and here is this little boy, Royston, Georgia, a little small town. There was a rumor that Ty's mother was having an affair. So his dad, who was a businessman and a historian, Ty worshipped his father. He went on a, quote, business trip. This is, 1905, on horse and buggy. And he's going to be gone the whole week. Came back that night, got a ladder to climb up to the second story, and his wife, thinking it was a burglar or something, blew his brains out, you know. There was all kind of stories that somebody said they heard a second shot later. His mother was actually tried for murder. Can you believe? You know, Ty had a nervous breakdown as a result of that. And in his autobiography of great interest, 2 sentences about this. My father died in a gun accident. And then said one other. That's all he said. You know, so he spent his whole life trying to kind of get his father's blessing. His father didn't want him going to baseball. Baseball was not a sport that attracted good people then. There were a bunch of rowdy drunks, you know. So he never got his father's blessing. And then his first year up in Detroit, he's fighting the Civil War all over again. And his teammates just, you know, they'd steal his bats and saw him in two. They just made it miserable. And he himself admitted that I became a beast as a result of the way they did him. So Ty just spent the rest of his life mad at God and mad at the rest of the world and for taking his dad away from him. He was really a terrible husband and father, but he also did some good stuff. There were kids going to college today in Georgia as a result of Ty's scholarship fund he set up, and he, in Royston, gave the bulk of the money to build the Cobb Memorial Hospital, which he's got a nice little set of his stuff there. A lot of it's in the Hall of Fame, but so the man did a lot of good. He's always depicted as just being a scoundrel. He really wasn't. He was just very complex. A lot of things went into making him what he was, but fascinating creature. Tris Speaker's in that mixed bag group up the road. Tris, by the way, they have it now, so if you want to go to his gravesite, they put a flagpole. They didn't have one for the cemetery there at Hubbard. And so people were trying to find Tris, so they just put the flagpole right by his gravesite. So if you ever want to go, you just go into the cemetery and go to the flagpole, and there's Tris. Tris' father died when Tris was young, and he was just wild. He just got on a horse there in Hubbard City, it was called, and rode around with a gun and shooting the gun, 11-year-old kid. You see the early pictures of Tris, he got a scowl on his face. He just, he could get in arguments with umpires, so he's literally blue in the face, and he'd fight people. He challenged Babe Ruth one time to a fight. And we don't know what happened, but I'm pretty sure Tris wasn't one that backed off. They didn't have a fight, but and Tris wasn't as big as the Babe, but he would have taken him on. But then something happened to him. You see in the later part of his life, he's got a big smile on his face. There was a transformation that happened with him. When his good friend Ray Chapman died, the only major league ball player ever to die as a result of something that happened in a ball game when he was hit by Carl Mays in the head with a pitch, apparently unintentional, and died the next day. Ray Chapman, by the way, his gravesite in Cleveland, he died in 1920, almost 100 years ago. There's more stuff at his gravesite: balls, bats, flowers. He's been dead 98 years, and people still go out there and visit his gravesite. Well, he was Tris's roommate. Well, Ray had only been married recently, and his wife said that Ray had become a Catholic. And of course, teams then tended to be divided up. You got the Catholic group and the Protestant group, and they fought each other. It wasn't a happy group. So Tris said, no way that would have happened. So he fought that. They were going to have a Catholic service and bury him in a Catholic cemetery. Well, Tris did talk him out of burying him in the Catholic cemetery, so he's buried in another one there in Cleveland. But they had the service at a Catholic church, and Tris didn't go. He said the idea was, well, he was all shook up. No, he didn't go because he hated Catholic. Several years later, he got married. And guess what? He married a Catholic woman. It's wonderful, great story of. And he was, of course, probably a Klansman at one point, or close to it. Helped Larry Doby become a good ball player. So that just a lot. Tris started out where you think, this guy going to tear up the world, and yet became kind of an elder statesman. Died up here at Lake Whitney, went fishing with a buddy, and out there like he often did, and had a heart attack and died. There, the last words he said, his friend got some people there. The last words, I'm Tris Speaker, and that was the last word. And had a nice funeral, and several people come. I put Rogers Hornsby in there because they wouldn't let me have a category of the absolutely no goods. I mean, people who could not get along with any human being, and Rogers Hornsby was that way. He was consistent. He offended everybody. You have to give him credit for that. It's just amazing what he could do. His first wife jumped out of a third-story building to her death. He was married several times, and it'd leave him. He couldn't have a relationship with anybody, and just the players just hated him. But he was a tremendous ball player. So he's in the mixed bags. Other people I put in there that you don't like to see there, like Joe DiMaggio. Everybody puts him up there. And Joe's first part of his life, okay. The latter part, he just became a greedy, self-centered person. It's tough to read that about a man that's supposed to have all this grace and dignity. He didn't have much of that at the end. And one of the great stories I like about him, it shows what had happened to him in the 1989 World Series when they had the earthquake in San Francisco, remember? Joe's the family home he had purchased, and his sister lived in that home there in the Bay Area. And so Joe wanted to check out where, see if the house had been damaged, and they wouldn't let people through there, but of course they let Joe. So Joe goes down to the house, comes back and tells the press, who had kind of gathered, that he's looking for his sister, and he had a big garbage bag of stuff, and they thought, isn't that something? Here's a big, Joe's taking out the garbage. No, there was $600,000 in that bag of stuff that he had got when he'd go and do autographs. He was the signing machine. He'd spent hours signing bats and balls. He'd stuff money into safety deposit vaults. And then he'd say, why you do this, doing it for the kids? Nah. his one son died 6 months after Joe died from drugs. In fact, I almost couldn't find him for Joe's funeral because he was living in squalor out there somewhere in the woods. It's a sad story. So Joe's not a happy one to talk about. Earlier part, the first real 5-star ball player, I guess. He could do everything, you know. Let me tell you about another guy that's in here, Carl Hubble, you know, the meal ticket, the left-handed screwball pitcher. He's a mystery to me. You almost know nothing about him, but there was a guy at North Texas, retired professor of North Texas, who wrote the biography of him. He was already in his 80s when he wrote this. And he throughout the books, you know, it's frustrated that he can't find much about his personal life. And so after reading the book and wanting to get some more information, he was able to dig some stuff out. For example, Carl never spent off season with his family. He's from Meeker, Oklahoma, east of Oklahoma City. By the way, all of his stuff is in Meeker. The Hall of Fame wanted all his memorabilia. He gave it all, and it's in the city hall there in Meeker. Go in this little small city hall, and he got a whole room of Carl Hubble stuff. It's neat if you're up that way. Well, he never seemed to go home. He'd be working somewhere else. His wife died during spring training one year. We don't think he even went to the funeral. They stayed married. She was not buried in Meeker. She's buried in Shawnee, where she was from. So that's weird. The writer tried to reach him. So I ended up calling this man, Dr. Blaisdell, to try to get some information. And so his wife answered the phone, and I identified myself, told him what I was interested in. May I speak to your husband? And she burst out crying. He had died that week, you know. Oh gosh, I apologize. I'm so sorry. But she's I'll be willing to talk. She said he had tried to call her husband and tried to call the couple. They had 2 kids. Hubble had 2 kids, and they not only weren't cooperative, they cussed him out. We don't want to talk to you. Don't ever contact us about our father. So there's just a mystery there, and apparently not much relationship. He finally lived his final day. He lived into his 80s, Hubble did, and was in Arizona, had a car wreck and things, and had a tough life. But he had enough money to live off of. But he's kind of I would have put in a mystery category, like Joe McCarthy, the manager. They just don't let you know much about themselves, and they never talked about what they're really feeling. Well, the Eccentrics, let me tell you, I got Rube Waddell, craziest guy, great pitcher, a genuine nutcase, and if you look at the pictures of him, his eyes. He's from another planet. This guy, he's just, where'd he come from? And but he could pitch. One year he struck out over 300 batters, which was more than Cy Young and Walter Johnson combined. He was just devastating and huge guy. And he just did weird stuff. He'd, in the middle of a game, chase a fire truck. He's fascinated by fire trucks. Or he'd be under the stadium shooting marbles with kids. He'd not show up for games. He'd go fishing, hunting, whatever. Just Connie Mack, bless his heart, hung in there with him for 5 years, and sometimes had a detective trailing him to make sure. He got drinking a lot, and he never had any money. He'd blow it all, and so what he'd do sometime when he pitched a real good game. One particular game, I forget what it was. It might have been when he struck out 21, or he pitched a no-hitter. I forget what. But he'd go to a bar and he said, "Here's the ball that we used in this game, and I would trade it for drinks." Well, he'd go to about 20 bars, got this ball, which probably never had even been close to that game. So he'd trade that baseball for drinks. But he'd do things like he'd wrestle alligators, and one time somebody saw him going to a parade, and he'd march going down, leading the parade, and every city he went to, he'd do handsprings, and he'd coach on first base, which players did then, and he'd be mimicking umpires and doing all kind of wisecracks. So everywhere he went, people would love this guy. He's an entertainment, and he could pitch. Well, he was helping out. He was in Kentucky at the time when it had flooding, and he helped with sandbagging and kind of became a local hero for helping out. He got sick. He went to St. Louis trying to go south. They found him wandering the streets. He had a sister near San Antonio. I don't think he'd ever even been to Texas. And so they contacted her and sent him down there, but he died within a few months. And yet they buried him in San Antonio. They later moved him to another cemetery in San Antonio. And thanks to John McGraw and Connie Mack, they got a really neat granite monument set up for him. And he's there, as well as Ross Youngs, who's also a Hall of Famer, died very young. So here he had no Texas connections, and yet he's buried there in San Antonio. But fascinating. Of course, Dizzy Dean's in here. What a delightful human being to do. Dizzy's gravesite's in a little cemetery in Mississippi, in Bond, Mississippi. It's not as big as his room. And one thing I've noticed in looking up these folks, that the only logos, team logos you find on grave sites are either Yankees or Cardinals. I've never seen any other logo on anyone, but there are 4 or 5 Yankees that'll do it. Billy Martin's got it on his. Earl Combs, Bill Dickey up here at Little Rock. In the Cardinals, Dizzy's got it on his, a few of these others. So it's kind of interesting to see how the team identity with players carried over. Hubble's just got the meal ticket on his little one in the ground plaque. So Satchel Paige, what an incredible human being he was, and what he could do. That's great stories about him. Casey Stengel, all these nutcases, they just a delight to be around. They loved the game, and they had